All right, the writer's name is Chris. This is a Bigfoot story. He says it's true, but let's see what he writes. In the early 1980s, when I was just a little kid, my family would visit my paternal grandparents' farm in southern Indiana. It was a 2-hour drive to get there. You turned in and drove up a long gravel driveway, and that led up to their 2-story farmhouse. My grandparents originally owned 90 acres until a state highway got routed through it. They ended up losing more acreage due to a drought, which put them in financial bind, and they were forced to sell off a further section of land, and they ended up with 50 acres. But they still had plenty enough room to roam around. My grandfather was usually tending to livestock or out in the cornfield. My grandmother would make me and my brother lemonade, nice tea, after which we would walk the farm or head toward the woods without a care in the world. Man, I miss those days. The sun was high, and as usual, we ventured out into the woods. We got 10 yards in, and we got a whiff of the most ungodly odor. It stopped us right then and there. It smelled like a combination of roadkill, skunk, and wet dog. My younger brother and I tried not to puke. Well, we got another 10 yards, and we heard the rustling in the thicket just to our left. At first, we thought it was a deer, as there are many running around these parts. And the way it moved, it had to be a deer, but we couldn't see it for sure because the thicket was full of saplings that stood well over 6 feet. We crept along another 10 yards before we both started gagging because the awful smell was back again, and it was strong as hell. There was a noise like before, only this time to the right of us. We heard an animal of some sort let out a large grunt, and 15 yards away, we spotted it. It had a massive, dark head, and it was standing behind a big oak tree. It had to be over 6 feet tall. We couldn't make out any details like eyes or a face, as night was falling and the light was vanishing. We stood in total fear staring at this thing. When it disappeared behind the tree, it was our cue to get the hell out of there, like both our britches were on fire. And as we ran, I lagged behind my younger brother, taking quick glances behind me to make sure this thing wasn't following. Later, we told our parents and our grandparents what had happened. In that moment, I learned why you should never tell anyone about your Bigfoot encounter. We were laughed at, and then lectured by the adults for having overactive imaginations and our storytelling baloney. My brother and I talked about it and agreed from then on to never tell people of our stories. We didn't go back to the farm for a while, and when we did, we avoided the woods. It took us a solid year to eventually go back in there. It was fine at first, but then, well, maybe that will be the story for another day. This was my first Bigfoot encounter out of many. I've had brushes with UFOs and aliens, too. I think it's all been a curse, or maybe I messed up in a past life or something. I would laugh out loud, but I don't know how I've remained sane, if that's what you call sane. Well, that was a good story, man. The thing about this that stood out to me was your brother was with you, so you have someone to corroborate your story. And that's cool. I mean, you both saw this thing. You both smelled it, and you were both looking behind you to make sure it wasn't tracking you. That's a good story, Chris. When there's 2 people together that see it, another person can back up the other person's story. That makes it pretty solid, Thanks for the story, buddy. Okay, we're just going to have one story in this short podcast today. My computer went down Monday. This is Thursday morning, and I'm just now getting back to work. It took me 3 days to rebuild all my software and get the passwords and download everything like I'm supposed to with my regular software that I use for my work and all the software for the podcast. You have to go in those programs and reset them up the way you had it set up. I still don't have the sound right on these podcasts, so if they sound kind of funny, don't worry about it, I'll get it fixed. But I wanted to get something out this week, and I'm really far behind on my regular work, so I've got to dig in and get caught up before some of these people start firing me. I don't want to get fired. So I got to work extra hours, but I hope to have time in the next, week or two to at least do these 5 or 10 minute podcasts and keep the stories coming because they're so good. And you all know I love doing this. So I might be able to get one out this weekend. I've got a really good story. It's about probably 45 minutes or an hour. It's one story. It's really good. I'm going to shoot for that Saturday or Sunday, but you guys have a good weekend. It's Thursday and you'll probably hear from me by then. Have a good one. Thank y'all.